Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here, actually. You've got such a great program at McGill. There's so many excellent students come through. I have so many old friends on the faculty, and it's been too long since I've been here, so it's really great to be back, and it's a privilege to talk to you guys about some of the stuff I'm doing. The talk will have a lot of stuff dealing with music. It's in a few pieces. I'm doing my best to try to keep it all together. I kind of put a bunch of things together and stomped on it, and we'll see how well it anneals, especially with the extreme jet lag I'm dealing with. But again, talking about music gets me jazzed, so I think it's going to work out. Some of you have already been to the website, but most everything is posted there. A lot of the new work is still kind of in various stages, but it's all going to get out there pretty quick because a lot of the projects I talk about at the end are pretty mature now. So my group has evolved quite a bit. When I started actually way back in the mid-90s, I came to the Media Lab in 93 as a visitor, and then 94. I came actually to work with Todd Mackover, a composer at the lab doing a lot of augmented instruments, and Neil Gershenfeld, who was the physicist I could talk to, since my background, as you'll see in a minute, is also in physics. So I had kind of a home there, and I started hacking around and building lots of sensors for interfaces, mainly musical interfaces, because it's really meant a lot to me. So when I formed my group, it really was around those ideas. New kind of sensors, new technologies for new kinds of interfaces. In the mid-90s, it was a little bit of a fringe. It's much more mainstream now, but we had a lot of fun, and a lot of what I'm going to show you kind of derives from that period. Then my group started to shift. The whole idea of sensors playing a bigger role in what the computer was becoming was more of a priority. So we began to look at ubiquitous computing, pervasive computing. Those things started to really take off. So we saw our role as kind of being new kinds of sensor architectures for ubiquitous computing. You see our logo is kind of amorphous here without too much meaning. But then it gelled, and you heard just now kind of what our mission is now. And I think it's a big mission for many of us working in electronic media and computer science and even engineering at different levels. The world is being covered with an electronic nervous system. Things we're buying have more and more sensors on them. Look at mobile phones, clear example. It's incredible the sensors that are on them now. Toys have all kinds of sensors. Appliances have sensors. They're getting cheaper. People just start including them. At a certain point, those things are going to all be networked and share their affordances. So we're going to see a shift in the ecology of devices, just like we saw with PCs when the web came over. When the web suddenly came along, your PC was no longer by itself. It was part of this big web of information that was out there. And we're going to see the same thing with consumer devices. All the sensors, all the affordances are all going to be shared, and we're not going to author on one device. We're going to author on a whole ecology of devices. So we see that kind of expanding at a certain point to be an extension of human perception. This is a basic nervous system that's coming up from within. Eventually will cover the world. How do you interface human perception, human sensing to this big web of machine perception? How do you take these machine electronic sensors and funnel them into human awareness? So we try to look at that from many different viewpoints, but that's kind of where we're heading now. So those are some high-level goals. This is a rough outline for the talk. Again, it has a few disjointed parts, and I think if I stomp on them enough verbally here, I can make them come together. I'm going to say a little bit in the beginning about where I come from, why I kind of do what I do, maybe. Of course, it still puzzles me, but maybe you'll understand a bit when I'm done. Some of you might know about my big synthesizer. Those of you who don't, I think, would enjoy a tour through it. Of course, this is a music group of sorts, music technology, so I'll spend a little more time than usual on that. Issues in music controllers, I talk with your faculty about these things all the time, and we always have ongoing discussions. This can take like the whole afternoon. I just have a few slides I throw up with a few basic things, but just to put a stake in the ground. It's certainly a discussion that goes on and on. Then, of course, the meat of the thing, some controllers I've done. Some of you know some of them. I'll give you quick tours of a few, and I'm going to show you kind of where they evolve. So, we do music still, but we kind of broaden, as you can see, our charter. So a lot of things start as a musical instrument. They become something very different, and I'll give you some examples of how they evolve now. So this is kind of how it began. Everybody in this room has a picture like this, right? Maybe not many of you are as old as this, but certainly I was addicted to music ever since I can remember. It was always important. And those few records that I had evolved into the 3,000 albums and 10,000 CDs that clogged my life and are now becoming virtualized very quickly as I rip them. But as Marcelo knows, I'm a progressive rock addict, so it's kind of hard to beat. And then I had the other side to my life. I was always hacking stuff, always taking things apart, and I was into sensors for a very long time. That was in junior high. And that's always played a big role in my life. So again, where sensors and music come together, of course, is in musical control, so it's kind of a natural thing for me. But the sensor part won out academically. I did my PhD at MIT in high energy physics. I was actually working in Europe at DAISY in Hamburg and CERN in Geneva with Ting's group. They just won the Nobel Prize when I joined. That was actually in the ring of Petra, the E+ E- storage ring that was up in DAISY in Hamburg. So I did 4 years doing that and then postdoc to DTH for 2 years. And my work kind of at the end of physics was in triggering. And triggering is an intriguing part of these big detectors. It's the very fast decision that's made. I mean, detectors are large sensors. They've got all kinds of sensing elements to sense the particles as they're created and as they're absorbed in different parts of the detector. And the event rate, especially something like the LHC at CERN, is much, much too high to store all the stuff on any kind of magnetic storage or any kind of archival storage. Doesn't matter what you have. They have to throw events away. It's many tens, hundreds of gigabytes per second. So they throw events away in real time. And they do fast pattern recognition to do that with a layered decision architecture. And in some sense, this is not too far from what we call sensor networks. Sensor network is you've got a wireless peer-to-peer connection, perhaps it could be a tree hierarchy, but you're making decisions as the data flows. So it kind of grew out of this work I was doing in a way, at least in terms of my interests in high energy physics trigger architectures. There's something of an analogy there. But again, I had that other side to my life. Music was always the big siren call that was bringing me onto the rocks. So, going back to when I was in elementary school, an uncle gave me this record, Switched on Bach, late 60s. This is something that kind of landed like a bombshell and brought the electronic music synthesizer into the popular vernacular. Wendy Carlos basically just took the analog synthesizer that Mo developed and did a wonderful job actually coaxing sounds out of it that were very, very unusual at the time, but still very acceptable, and people would get to like them. It was a best-selling classical record for many, many years. So it really had a huge impact on the field, but very much on me as a kid. And part of it was, okay, the music you listen to, it's interesting, it's Bach, but what the hell are those sounds? But what's this picture? And he's unfortunately in front of it, so it's a little strange. I thought for a while he was Wendy Carlos, actually. Wasn't too far from the truth, I guess. And actually I have tremendous respect for Wendy Carlos. The stuff that she's done since this also has been quite amazing. But these knobs, these things, I was trying to figure out what these modules were. I had no idea. So I was just trying to figure out from hearing the sounds. Then, of course, Mort Subotnick was recording his stuff on Nonesuch, and you can buy those for like $1 in the cutout bin at the supermarket. So I bought a bunch of those, and the sounds are even wilder. And what the heck is this thing? I mean, the booklet is just an amazing panel. This guy is hard at work at this. Just totally fascinating. So I had to have one. I just had to have a synthesizer. And then, of course, being a teenager in the days of prog rock, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, all the big bands playing with these big modulars, that solidified it. I needed one of these things. And I couldn't buy one. These are $10,000, $20,000 back in those days, a tremendous amount of money. So I had to build it. And, I talked to Dave Rossum, the founder of EMU. He's an old friend now. And, we trade stories once in a while. And he told me that, he thinks in our generation, it took the place of ham radios. Before us, everyone would build a ham radio. That was the big thing. During the kind of later 60s, early 70s generation, it was building a synthesizer. So we're all building synthesizers who want to learn electronics. So that's how Dave and I and many, many, many others of us learned electronics in those days. So I built one. Over a decade, 1975, 1985, in bursts. It became an obsession, without a doubt. It turned into 180 modules, lots of strange things. I'll give you, again, a tour through some of it, analog and digital functions. Not strictly analog, a lot of digital state machines in there, too. And at the time, I could have built, especially toward the end of that period, I could have built a digital synthesizer. Bill Buxton, of course, did something like this around that time. You can get a microprocessor. Roger Powell, other people were kind of hacking these things together. You could get a microcomputer, an LSI-11, and build some real-time simple synthesizer out of it. But it would take forever to get it to work, and it would be very limited in what it could do. But at the same time, all these chips were coming out for other purposes that had tremendous capability for sound production. So I could get an IC that was meant for something, logic function, who knows what. And by the way, I can clock it up at audio and get some wonderful sound out of it. So it was really a test bench for all these weird chips I could find. I just make sound with them. So this is when I first started building it. This is in my basement of my parents' house. All these things kind of began in parents' basements, right? And that's actually where it's back living now until I get space at MIT to set it up again. So that's 1976. This is the cord from the lamp. I wasn't a great photographer back then. But this is me building the first unit. So I basically figured out, I wrote actually to all the synthesizer companies, got pamphlets describing at least what was there, and based on their description I could figure out what the circuit was. There was also the great electronic design stuff by the Paya guys going through their modules, so I read and understood all that. And as you can see, the linear integrated circuit book from analog device, from linear semiconductors, the op-amp circuit book was quite thin. It evolved eventually into about 4 or 5 volumes. Now it's all virtual. So in those days, it was possible to learn pretty much whatever you had to for this kind of technology and make it work and build something that actually would make sound. So that was the first cabinet. This is when I graduated actually at Tufts, my last year, 1977. It was done in 76, actually. So this is in my bedroom at the time. That's the keyboard that went with it. This is an old Gibson organ that I kind of hacked up that plugged in somehow. So that was the device. And I had fun. The oscillators weren't terribly stable, but I could still do some fun things with it for a while until they drifted. And even then, it was kind of fun. That's with knobs. This is before I could afford knobs. Now I found cheap ones and got a little better. Then when I was postdocing in Zurich, I had a great electronics lab at my disposal. I worked like hell the first year, 24 hours a day, typical MIT style, and kind of got ahead of the job. But then I had to do something else. And breaking into social circles in Zurich was a little bit difficult. It's kind of, back then, especially a bit of an uptight society, especially for a workaholic physicist. So I started getting all these ideas coming about instruments. And that was the days of the cheap digital keyboards. The Casio tones were coming out around then. And I thought, okay, this is great because it makes great sounds I haven't heard before, really. But if I get into this thing and pull signals out from inside, it can probably make even better sounds. And hell, that keyboard is hard to play. I'm going to put a real keyboard on it, and so on and so forth. So this is a Casio VL tone here. The VL tone is still living under this mask. But I broke out all the functions I could, including the keyboard, and abstracted it into this big thing. And all the patch points talk to the modular, all use the common standard. So it can control the modular can control it at various levels of detail. And this is before people had the word circuit bending. I didn't know what it was. I was just hacking a Casio so I could do something with it. And of course, I had to do it with the SK1. This is the world's cheapest sampler that came out a few years later. And the same idea, I found all kinds of points to get interesting sounds and control points and built an interface for the modular to it. So this is my apartment in Zurich a night or two before I left. You can see the record collection is already getting big. I used to go to the Recommender Records outlet there and buy all kinds of avant-garde stuff. So that's the beginning of this obsession. This is the other obsession here. So I had built all these things. I was trying to figure out how to get them all back through customs. So I just put it in boxes I labeled domestic stuff, or plates or dishes or whatever else. And it worked. It took a few weeks, but I got this stuff back in Boston more or less intact. That's a view of all the modules that I built there. And then, of course, I had to keep on going. I had, at that point, I could get, use Mini Moog. I could get the old Radio Shack Micro Moog, things like that. But hell, I mean, they're kind of simple if you just play them. They're wonderful instruments, but a little too simple for what I wanted to do. But I thought they have great components in them. Let me just break out all the functions in these things with a 50 cable connector and patch it into the modular. So if you pull these cables out, it still works like it always does. Even with them in, it works like it always does. But I can now inject and pull out signals at all stages of the chain in these instruments. So this is the interface it plugs into. So it breaks out all these various points to things that the modular can speak. So it's a much more useful device now when I plug it into this. And you can still play the Mini Moog, so it doesn't interfere with the device. So this is what my living room looked like. This is a year or two after I got back from Europe. I used to play those keyboards in those days, and you can see everything's plugged in. I put these huge patches in, and I had a lot of fun with it. Not to say I would entertain people very often in my living room unless they were musicians. That was actually where I wound up in my condo. The last time I had it actually fully set up at home. I had a little studio in the corners. These are the keyboards that are all interfaced. That's the unit. It was actually somewhat ergonomic in this configuration. And of course, I made lots of pieces. These are on the web. I'm not going to play any of these. I'll play some excerpts in a minute. But I'll give you a little video. This is actually back when I was in the condo, just doing a generic patch. Of course, you can play the keyboards and stuff. I did that for a while. But this instrument evolved into something that was more like a state machine, more like an audio sculpture, where I basically just patched some autonomic process in there and just keep expanding it and expanding it and expanding it by adding more to it until it became a whole sound installation. So there's no manual intervention here. It's just doing what it does. So I had lots of fun with things like that. I have like collecting butterflies. I have whole collections of these sound patches that I would do. And I remember where everything was, at least for a week or two. And you could really quickly, you have your hands on the sound. You kind of know what's there. You can quickly adjust, quickly tweak, quickly change sounds. The spatial memory of where things are really makes you very, very quickly converge into sound design. So it's a great environment. The only difficulty is that it will never come back. And maybe that's good because it forces creativity. Because you don't have presets. You have to always start from scratch. The presets don't get to be in your head after a while, which is another story. Then there are a lot of other modules. As I mentioned, I'd take chips that were out, use them in unusual ways, or break them open so I could patch them into the synth to attain other kinds of functions. This, for example, is a tone volume balance control, all voltage control that came from a car stereo, just a chip for car stereos I could break out. This is one of my favorite devices, actually. It's just a normal ADC, analog digital converter, and I could have it self-clock, so I would just run it at its peak rate and just digitize whatever you put in the analog. The difference is that I didn't have a logarithmic resistor ladder on it for a DAC. I had a bunch of pots, so you could adjust whatever kind of weighting you wanted on the output. And that would do wonderful things to something like a simple sine wave or triangle wave, because as these bits are coming on, it makes sound of hell breaking out all over Earth here. So this is an example. That's a triangle wave. And I'm just modulating the amplitude of the triangle wave. And that's the output of this thing. So it's a little bit more complicated than then I had other things. This here, for instance, is something that I got just from a surplus catalog. It had all these little circuit cards that would go to alarms. And they would put these little digital pulse waves out that you'd put to a piezo speaker, and they make different kinds of sirens, yelps, wails, beeps, horns, so on and so forth. And I figured, okay, I had all these control points. I can voltage control them. I can also exclusive OR the outputs, so I can mix them together in a nonlinear way. And I can control all that electronically with electronic switching. So this is basically kind of like the worst disaster in the world if you have all these sirens going off at once and mixed in electronic ways and switching. Kind of a strange but useful effect. This is a chaos generator. So this is actually solving the logistic map. It's essentially doing, 1 plus alpha times x squared, and you just keep repeating that map. Everyone knows it. You get an output like this, where you start seeing the bifurcations as you increase the gain alpha, until finally you get into chaos. But I did this in the analog, so it's got analog sample holds, analog multipliers. It's solving this. I can voltage control the level into chaos that you're at. So it's a voltage controlled chaos generator, which turned out to be a very useful little module. So this is just driving an audio frequency with an oscillator. You can hear it going through the bifurcations. I'm speaking up the control voltage. This is the first bifurcation, and now I'm into chaos. So that's a chaotic signal, and I can back it off. It still has some of the quality of the clock in it, though, so you can, it's not quite pitched, but it's got some. And this is just a sequencer driving it. So now I'm just increasing the chaos. And then you could use this thing itself as a sequencer. So here, I'm just taking the output and controlling an oscillator and increasing the chaos. So I'm just clocking it at a clock rate. So you can hear the bifurcations just in the pitches. And now it's going through a fairly limited limit cycle. And as I turn it up, it gets more and more chaotic. So it kind of gets into riffs, but they change. It's typical chaos stuff. So again, having that in an analog device was kind of fun. Phase lock loops, they're really underappreciated. I haven't seen them in digital synthesizers. Has anybody made a plugin doing a phase lock loop? They're wonderful, and I haven't seen it. I've been trying to. I actually told Julius Smith, Julius, here, listen to these sounds, make it. And I don't know, maybe, hopefully, he has. Should be straightforward to do because you can make them wildly unstable. And when you're tracking it on a keyboard, it's a wonderful sound because it doesn't quite sometimes track what you're doing. It kind of does, and different notes lock into different harmonics. It just feels very alive. And I use them quite a bit. So I have a bunch of them in my synth. This is 2 of the original ones, but I built more of them. And then I have friends of mine who would play instruments. They give me their old effects pedals sometimes, my guitarist friends, and I just incorporate them, at least in the first module, first synthesizer into module. So voltage control, reverb, fuzzbox, so on and so forth. Electronic chimes, switches, logic gates. This is a touch tone generator. You could dial the phone if it wanted to, actually. I actually did it once. You just put a sequencer and it dials the phone. But they're useful sounds. Again, more logic. This is a top octave generator. So the entire octave, you can build whatever chord you want on it. And it's on a phase lock loop, so it'll track another source. This is a single chip game synthesizer of the day where it had a whole synthesizer on a chip that would be digitally controlled with some analog inputs. A little thumper percussion box with analog voices from resonant filters and noise generators and stuff. So you can do all kinds of weird things with that. This is one of my favorites. It really is probably the good flavor of the synth. It's the speech generator. I heard it actually speaking when I was living in Europe in a German gas system. It would be giving warnings in German for the wrong kind of gas mixture in the physics detectors. So I thought I got to have one of these. I wrote away to the company, the Votrax screw company actually, and I got one. And of course I built a unit where I could, for my sequencer, give it bits and it would talk, and I could phase lock loop the thing so it could, I could control the pitch, have it track other oscillators. This is a very useful, very, very versatile device. And of course I had things like an Optigan. This is one of the first commercial low-cost samplers. So had optical discs with soundtracks on them. And it didn't sound great, but it had a certain kind of a muddy quality. Some of you know this device. I, of course, broke it out, had all kinds of patch points. The Optigan could actually control my entire synthesizer with the clocking signals and stuff that came off of it. The cat liked to sleep in the expression pedal, though, so I had to tape that up. For some reason, he really liked the Optigan. It must be the light, warm light inside. So, okay, I did stuff with it. Then, we moved. Now I have 2 kids. I have no space for my synthesizer at home yet. But I did have a chance to set it up a few years ago at Ars Electronica. The Gertrude Starker, the people that run the festival, knew I had one of these. And at their 25th anniversary, they wanted to bring one there. And because in the heyday, they had Klaus Schulze and all the famous musicians that played with those come and play. So Gertrude asked me if you mind if I brought it to Linz, they would ship it. And I said, sure. So we created it up and brought it there. So for a whole week, I had my studio in Linz. So I went all out and totally immerse myself. Every day I'd do a new patch. So it would start from scratch in the morning, and people would kind of see me like the guy that paints in front of everybody, right? And then I'd finish. Actually, it was kind of hard when I would start a patch. I'd need headphones because I just couldn't start something with people looking at me. Once I got something running, some chord, then it didn't matter. I was just immersed in it. I could build it out. So this is a couple of examples. This is a kind of a sound art thing. So the speech synthesizers, analog delays all over the place. That's the thumper drum box. I had a little Doppler radar as a controller, so as people moved around in this patch, they caused something to happen. So you get the idea. This one is I tuned it up and I kind of had a rock sequence going. So I did kind of a space rock thing. I don't know if I can exactly call it space rock, but it was inspired by it a little bit. So again, no intervention. This is just going by itself. Phase load loop is going to come in a minute. That's touch tones. You hear the touch tones. That's the phase log loop. And once in a while, it would just hang. So you get the idea. One more. This is kind of a new agey thing. This is the piece they played out in the big speakers on the Danube. So I figured, okay, let's make something kind of mellow. It's at night. Everyone's relaxing. So I did this one. Yeah. So the kind of gurgling sound is the Casio SK1 divided way, way down. Here, the main sequence pings back and forth. So I thought that was kind of cool when I heard it in the speakers. I had a quad mix at ours, so I had 4 speakers, and in the room where the synthesizer was, and people coming by, it sounded nice. But out on the Danube, these speakers were hundreds of meters apart, and because I was pinging back and forth, in the middle it was okay. If you were on either end, they were totally out of sync. You just totally lost the rhythm because it was a phase shift. But you guys are all aware of that, being audio people. So, okay, moving away from my synth. I mean, again, this kind of a patching interface does have its advantages. I mean, it's certainly got a problem, it doesn't scale, it's expensive, but that kind of tactile interface is great. And these devices did play a real role in music. We don't deny that. It's amazing, actually. There are more companies making modular synthesizers now than back in those days. I was just at Analog Heaven Northeast, which was in Lowell, just north of Boston, and a bunch of people came in with their hacked up things. So I figured, okay, I'm going to have it at MIT next year. So some of you may want to come down. Actually, Richard Bollinger from Berkeley is going to bring his old analog gear in, and a bunch of old timers. Maybe we'll get the booklets from Harvard. And maybe you guys can bring some of your store down. We'll have a big old equipment fest at the Media Lab. Does anybody know what synthesizer this is? Not that it's a Moog Series 3 or whatever else, but which particular one? It's an important one, actually. This is the synthesizer that Florian Fricke had. That's him there. He was the main guy behind Pulpovo, one of the kind of German new agey electronic bands back in the 70s. And he, after doing a couple of great records with it, actually, making really nice ambient sounds with the thing, he didn't like it anymore. He went to playing sitar and doing kind of acoustic things. So he gave it to Edgar Froese of Tangerine Dream. So this synthesizer really changed the sound of music. The Berlin sound was kind of born with this, and that is how I think these electronic sounds really grafted main time onto popular music. So this is the device that made that transition. And again, people would try to remember their patches, but I mean, look, this is useless, I think. It's a different art form. When you're patching, it's not an exact thing. You're just there in the moment, and that's where it lives, and when the moment's over, it's finished. People started doing interfaces, going to interfaces a little bit to these synths, actually, back in those days. This is Bernard Sejner. He's a French musician. This is supposedly a French modular of some sort. I don't know which one it is. But he would make these big light harps he'd play with. And for some parts of this, he could just do it better on percussion pads. But the spectacle of seeing this thing is incredible. So he really would go for spectacle. Indeed, he's the guy that designed Jean-Michel Jarre's laser harp. So it kind of scaled from there. Then there are people like Paolo Tofani from Aria. Back in the early 70s, he'd be plugging his guitar through a modular on tour and making these amazing sounds with it. Some of you who know prog rock would know this band. They just actually reformed. I saw them play in New York a week ago. Tofani is a Hare Krishna now. But he's still coming in with his homemade guitars. He's totally hacked up. And he's using nunchucks with a Nintendo Wii and mapping on his computer. He's still at the edge. But in 1972, he got to know the people running EMS. And they gave him an ATS synth and a pitch to voltage converter. There was no MIDI. And he would do things like this. And sounds like this back in those days were just radical. So that's his guitar driving the EMS in 72. Incredible musicians, actually. So, okay, MIDI comes, you can plug anything into a computer and use anything as a controller, and Keyboard Magazine indeed kind of jumped on that. I was reading Keyboard in those days. So the keyboards are for wimps is the controller article, right? But look at the cover. The keyboard is the superhero, and indeed it's true, the keyboard kind of won. These little controllers that people are coming out with, we all know them. They made something of an impact, but they didn't hit the mainstream. But things are different. Things are different now. This is a class I've been teaching at MIT for a while, one of the classes I teach. It's all about sensors. So I take students that come in from all kinds of backgrounds, much like some of you do here, I'm sure, and I go through different families of sensors, introduce them to them. And I give them a bit more detail than they need, but in principle, I mean, anybody can start plugging in a sensor. You go to SparkFun, there are user groups out there. You can use an Arduino and you make yourself a controller. So there's a real revolution. I mean, I don't have to tell you guys this. You're involved in it. You're part of the wave. So all kinds of innovation is happening. Anything could be a controller, and we'll have to see kind of what anneals. But now alternative controllers aren't necessarily something people talk about passively. They're happening. And they're all different. There's not one. There's an infinite number of them. So I made a lot of them. I'm going to quickly go through some of these in the bit of time I have and tell you about at least a few of them. A little bit first about controllers. I mean, we all know this, right? The acoustic instruments had a lot of time to anneal into what they are and perfect their sound. Electronic instruments are young, so they don't have time to become classic, really. On top of that, Moore's Law completely kicks the butt out of it because by the time you have a controller done and ready and doing something with a mapping in a computer, it's obsolete. Moore's law is completely revising what you can do. And even just running what you built years ago on stuff that's coming out now is almost impossible sometimes. So how do you archive this stuff? Maybe it gets easier once you have virtualized layers with the controllers and bus standards stay around for a while longer, but it's just not easy. So we're in a very strange business. And maybe it's doomed to have this kind of constant revolution. By the time something becomes established, it probably isn't what we consider to be a avant-garde electronic controller. So what describes an interface very quickly? I see kind of an instrument and a mixer metaphor. So an instrument, it causes a sound to be made. You control pitches. It's expressive. You can control, of course, the pitch, amplitude, and other kinds of timbre. I think path to virtuosity is important for an instrument. And quite often, at least in the controller community, people don't see that. Here, you guys get it very well. But as somebody's working on an instrument, there's got to be some path for them to practice, to learn, to become expert, to really become adept. And I think there's another thing. You look at classical instruments, they're really fascinating to look at. And I think if someone's performing, the visual spectacle of that instrument on stage is a big part of it too. I mean, we can't ignore it. It's going to project visually. And then there's the mixer metaphor, more of what you see in laptops, I guess, or people in the back there with that audio desk. That's controlling an audio stream, but you're nudging the process. It's not that real-time engaging control, but it's important. And if you look at a real instrument, it has a bit of both. It has a lot of selection, you can nudge, but then you have that real-time intimate control. So you've got both aspects of it. So what makes interface good? We all know. I wrote these down quickly. I mean, Perry Cook has his list. I'm sure Marcelo and all you guys have your own list. And I could refine this a lot. But off the top of my head, I mean, it's got to be fun to play. I mean, ideally, at some level, maybe after practice, but you have to have some experience with it that's rewarding. I think a match between gesture and sounds is important. People call this metaphor, but certain gestures should be giving certain kinds of sounds. We have natural associations that have been with us forever through evolution. So that's already valuable currency you want to exploit. It has to have a good haptic response, part of fun to play. There should be a reasonable sonic vocabulary, and it should be expressive. Of course, some of that could be in the mapping, not in the controller. I think this is kind of important. I like a little bit of instability. I'll get to that in a second, but it's got to be causal, right? You have to kind of know that if you give this kind of a gesture, it gives this output. But again, it can't be too stable because it's dead. You see it in violins very much, right? The best violins are the hardest to play. And I think any controller, if people are going to express, you want that mapping in the brain, not in the device. For a virtuoso, they want to be able to do anything, a flick of a little finger, any kind of a decision. So moving the mapping into the neurons as opposed to the device is important. It's got to be just at the edge of playability so it's expressive. And hence they're hard to learn. And you master for practice. And again, causality for the audience. We go around this a lot in the community. I think it can be kind of important if you're performing on stage. It's got to be something for people to appreciate besides the audio. So it's hard to define lots of things, but these are just some things up there. If you look at a model of an interface, you have a performer, you've got the interface, you've got some sort of a model that will make a sound. That could be a physical model, it could be totally synthetic and electronic. You've got some haptics the model produces and the interface produces, you have visuals. And they feed back to the performer that's playing and the audience. And a bad controller has these links broken. Certainly for the performer playing it, if you break any of these links, you have trouble controlling the thing. But for the audience, if you break any of these, people start seeing causality lapses. They don't really understand what's going on. So I think it's kind of the crisis we've faced as a community for a while. People are addressing it in different ways, but how do we bring the audience in on these very sophisticated devices that we're making? And one way, of course, is graphics as being kind of the body of the new instrument. So laptop musicians have definitely gotten it. Guitar Hero is kind of halfway there, right, where the visual is as important as the device. But there's some path here. I don't know whether it's the final path, the best path, but the graphics, the process that makes the sound makes, can be a tie-in for people that are observing. And again, if you kind of look at this analogy, right, you have a continuum where you've got mixers that are very, very parallel, but not too expressive. There's a lot of choice. The sound mark instruction, of course, is another kind of device where you can touch and trigger things. A lot of choice. Expressivity, you can argue about. I've never really seen Sal perform. I've seen muddy videos. I've talked to him. I went back when he was alive. But again, lots of choice. You look at the Alice synthesizer, incredible. Lots of choice. Look at all these controllers. And then very interesting joysticks and things like that. So lots of expression, lots of couple control, the kind of things that Marcelo has looked at and done some great work with. And then the SAC button. Again, you've got tremendous control. Hewlett Kane's marvelous device many years ago. And lots of coupled degrees of freedom, lots of expressivity. So choice and coupled expression, very important. So I see, the blend of both of these that's important in instruments as being what we see in cockpits. So I think instead of looking at HCI maybe as the way to analyze them, look at pilots, look at flying, and analyze it the way that somebody would analyze flight. I think Kirby Hancock got it, right? I mean, this is from the thrust. Maybe you know this old record. So certainly you develop this relationship with the instrument that's very intimate. This is a synthesizer or a controller I've really enjoyed. It's something I found in Keyboard Magazine years ago in that controllers column. A geophysics engineer invented it, actually. He liked to whistle, and he wanted to be able to extend his whistling through different kinds of tricks and mapping. So I built this wonderful thing with, you just want to play it, right? It's got these controllers for the fingers, it's got things for the palm. I saw this, I had to see what it sounded like. So actually I went, and it took a little effort, but I found the guy. He's still alive on the West Coast, and he got excited, he sent me a video. So this is Ugo Conti playing his thing.
It looks like a typical El Cerrito neighborhood.
But sometimes, if you listen closely, you'll hear something on the wind.
It comes from here, as inventor Ugo Conti practices on his Conti 1 whistle synthesizer. It's a device that takes an ordinary whistle and transforms it to...
Notice he's only using like a couple of fingers.
Basically, the pitch of that sound is transferred down in frequency or in pitch. 1 octave or 2 octaves or 3 octaves or 4 octaves or even something in between. And so that generates a sound which is lower than the whistle.
Ugo got the idea for the whistle synthesizer while sailing around the world with his wife and son as he played guitar and whistled to the stars of the South Atlantic.
It really sounded thin. And so my engineering mind said, we must do something about this.
I mean, the guy's clearly an innovator, right?
The result was this, a whistle synthesizer built into a guitar. He then developed the Conti 1, which right now would cost you a couple $1,000. A simpler, more practical model for the beginner is just over $400. Ugo says he's on a crusade to get people acquainted with his synthesizers, but he's also had feelers from Windham Hill Records, and that brings up his other goal, that of developing
my own music, which is very interesting, and now I have a tool. So I have an instrument, and I'm the only player. Right now, I'm the best.
The only drawback to the thing is that you've got to know how to whistle. As Ugo puts it, garbage in, garbage out. Something I had no trouble demonstrating. But if you think it's an instrument worth wetting your whistle for, wish you were here. Jonathan Mumm, News 10, El Cerrito.
He was very, very proud of that when I talked to him, and actually remarked that I remembered it. But he said he couldn't do much with it because not many people can whistle very well, so it just never went anywhere. But kind of an intriguing device. So, I don't have too much time to talk about my own controls, but I'll show a few quick examples. And again, a lot of the trajectories came from things I brought in, at least initially from physics, doing different kinds of measurements for alignment of these big detectors and stuff like that. For instance, the capacitive sensing that we did for measuring drift chamber alignment went into measuring bilimbos, this is early stuff I did with Todd Mackover. And stuff that we did for measuring alignment across distances with optics went into this digital baton that we did that kind of presaged the Wii back in '96. This is, though, one of the first big breakthroughs that we had done, the sensor chair. Some of you, the veterans in here, I'm sure have seen this, but some of the younger people probably didn't. It's a capacitive device, so we transmit it from this plate. We received around the front and also at the feet. So you move your hands on your feet, and you basically have a multi-dimensional theremin, so you can measure the proximity. And we did a thing with Penn and Teller. They kind of inspired it because they wanted to do a seance trick. And Todd wrote a whole opera for them. It was a total flop in Vegas, but it worked very well in Kresge Auditorium. So this is Teller here, and actually before I show that, let me show you what it was like when Teller first showed up. So we had a plywood mock-up, and we just put a random mapping of notes on it. And this is Teller just improvising. And Teller normally talks a lot. Of course, you shouldn't show video of Teller talking. This is his persona, but this shut him up. He was trying to figure out what he was going to do on stage. put little halogen bulbs in the sensors too, so we could give optical feedback. Again, trying to close a causality gap so the audience can see the instrument doing something. So Taylor did that quite a bit, and he practiced, and he evolved with Todd a whole mapping that we implemented. This is what we did at Kresge, again, just based on that initial seed. So here he's controlling a Yamaha Disclavier, and he's got a whole bunch of notes he can play, a different chord every time he goes in. So again, he's just clocking through a sequence of all these different mappings on the front, different notes. And now he's got 3 notes stacked vertically, and he has to hit them by moving his hand up. But he crunched his head down, and because of the log amps, I could see back to his head, and I was worried if he didn't pull his head up, he wouldn't get the last note, but he did. And you never want the last note to be wrong, that's for sure. So, and he's very theatrical. Teller sometimes can forget himself a little bit. Actually, the chief software person on that project was Aran Agozi. Many of you know him. He's the chief technologist of Harmonix. So he kind of went on after this, and they built the whole Guitar Hero empire. I mean, kind of its roots are in work like that with Todd. And that, of course, evolved into lots of things, but the biggest deal that it became actually was MIT's number 6 royalty for a while, a car seat sensor, occupant detection sensor for airbag deployment. Honda spun out a whole separate division to begin to produce this. Elsys is in many, many cars now. And it came because the people from NEC that were spawning this company were at that event, saw the performance, and talked to us about this application. So it was a real success for the technology. I'm going to talk quickly about wireless sensing platforms. I have a lot of time. I'll zoom through this. Some of you know this project. We had the first wearable computing conference at the Media Lab, so I figured, okay, I'll have something I can wear that has sensors using the performance. And I put sensors all over a shoe. I had a radio. I figured I'd do all these things, laser rangefinder, who knows what. And they accepted the paper. That meant I had to build it. So this is what it became. This actually worked in 1997. We did performances with it, but not for long, because things would start falling off this prototype board. It was like an old car. You know, the dancer is doing things, and you have to go back and do a pit stop and solder something back on. At one point during a performance, actually, the chips fell off. And at that point, I put a little, that's before you had flash memory, I had to put a little adhesive to keep the chip in there. This is what evolved in finally. This actually still works. We haven't done a performance in years, but it's a very robust platform, lots of sensors, wireless directly off. That was actually beginning in '98 when we evolved this. And this is one of the world's first multimodal wearable sensors. Now there are whole conferences around body sensing with sensors like this for healthcare and things like that. When I did this, people kind of laugh when I talk about all the sensors, but you know, the world changed a lot. Again, you measure lots of things, so you really get into the gate. I'll show a bit of one video. You guys probably know this, so I won't dwell on it. I'll show a little bit of this. So this is not Mark Heim, this is Byron Suber. He was a choreographer at Cornell, our first real dance collaborator. This is after hanging out with him for half a day and just putting these sounds onto different activities, just with a big rule base. This is all live. So he bends, everything goes up an octave, cymbals at the bottom of his toes, pressure sensors. With the tilt sensor, we know that he picks his foot up. And if he twirls, we know that too. And then we have a sonar so we can range to his foot. And then we had a capacitive sensor in the middle of the floor, so we could find the height of his foot above the floor and know that he was stepping on that platform. So that was then. This is a more recent project. We showed it actually at NEAM 2008 in Genoa. You can do this all on a mobile phone now at a certain point. We had a rack of synths in a computer, but heck, you have a synthesizer on a phone that's extremely capable, you have a nice processor. We had to add the ZB interface for our low-power sensors. But this revolutionizes mobile music, and I think it's just waiting for a famous artist to do a piece with Nokia, with Apple, who knows what. The only way you can hear it is to put it on and move and dance. It's going to change the whole exercise music, mobile music relationship. I mean, it's just waiting. It's going to happen. You now have things like the Nike Plus where it picks the track, changes the speed depending on how you're running, but these are all carbon copies of music. They're just bitmaps. Once you have something that's in there in a symbolic form, you can do a ton, and it can be done. It can be done. We did a version, a very simple one, but I think it's waiting, so we'll see what happens. I'm trying my best to seed it with some of our sponsors. Of course, this went different places. We work with doctors at the Mass General Hospital Gait Analysis Lab to do medical diagnosis of gait with lots of sensors on the shoe. We could begin to look at Parkinson's patients and separate them from normals, track the progress of their disease. We also did auditory feedback on, I'll show a little bit of this, on pathological gait. So Parkinson's patients can get into shuffle, and if they do, rhythm helps them break out. So here we have real-time, these get the shoes with sensors. It's making normal music. If he starts to shuffle, it becomes rhythmic. So as we get older and start getting things like Parkinson's, maybe our music players can help us. This is looking at using melody as another way of feeding back some sort of a pathological problem. So here we're looking at pressure. So there, if he's using his cane properly, this is Eric Asmussen, a student that came from Colgate actually. And if he's putting too much pressure on his foot, it gets into a minor key and then gets dissonant if he puts more on. I showed this at Chi. We had a paper Chi on this, and someone asked, what if they like the dissonant music? But it's just information, right? So then we built a baton, again, lots of different sensors. This is again the days before the Wii. We can look at pressure, accelerometer. We had our IR tracker, so we could track the thing around. And we did it for music. It was done for Todd's brain opera. But the brain opera mapping the baton was pretty lame. Todd had so much going on, you couldn't really hear what it was doing. So I had one of my students, Caillou, do a piece just for the baton. So here, he's beating. So if he beats, he accents certain notes. And then if he pushes one of the FSRs, he can play, at that point, it's a Yamaha VL1 guitar on the tip, on the tracker. So up and down are the notes, left and right is a timbre. You do vibrato if you press it a certain way. So it could be pretty expressive. I mean, all that control in your hand, you could do quite a bit. And again, the Wii is starting to fan that out to a much broader audience. Lots of people are doing interesting things with it. This is back in 1996. And we expanded that. We thought, okay, all these sensors, we can make anything an instrument, put lots of degrees of freedom. How in the heck do we map it? It's a big question. Lots of you thought about that too. We did a paper at Chi. David Merrill did his thesis actually on trying to use a dynamic time warping adaptation. So you pick a sound you want to play, give it the gesture you want to trigger on, give it a few gestures for different triggers, and then it would play variations of the sound back, and you do the gesture you want for continuous control, and it would map that together. Unfortunately, it doesn't play the VLC video anymore of it. I discovered just this morning, and there's not much time to play the high-level ones. So you guys can find this on the web. It's all out there. But again, I think it's an intriguing challenge that still isn't quite solved. How can maybe instruments adapt to us as opposed to we adapting to them? Where do we meet in the middle? Then I want to get back to dance after all this. So I figured, okay, let's do a whole dance ensemble, put the sensors on the upper and the lower body, and then we get all this data coming in. I mean, thousands of pieces of data every hundredth of a second. We have to then fuse all this stuff together to make features that a composer can find relevant to map on top of. So we looked at correlating in real time different sensors to look at how synchronized the ensemble was, identify the soloist from the other performers, looking at bulk motion, lots of other different features. This is the little sensor. We had a high bandwidth wireless network and just sent a full inertial measurement unit data back. We worked with dancers. We never did a real performance with it, but we took the data in real time and synthesized it in real time. So in principle, we could have done it, although our radio at those days wasn't great. This is a dance performance here. So it's using higher level features, correlation, amount of activity, upper versus lower body, other things, and basically just doing kind of a demo mapping. This is done by Ryan Airwood in my group. So it has something to do. It's responding to what they're doing. And then we had a capacitive sensor. So very Barbarella looking, but it could measure about half a meter, any distance between any two of them. So we're getting ready to do a performance. We had radio problems, but we're getting around them. We were interrupted by the Boston Red Sox, because even up here, the Red Sox. And when they ask you to do something in Boston, usually you listen. And in this case, it was their doctors, actually. From the other doctors we work with, the Red Sox doctors came. And they wanted us to go down to spring training and measure players. They had optical trackers like you guys do, too, here. And they were using them to look at pitchers and batters. But it takes a lot of time to set it up. It's fragile depending on the lighting. To do it outdoors is hard. You can't just slap the sensors on somebody, have them go right away on the mound. They liked our inertial sensors. So we could make a version we could just put onto a player, let them pitch, let them swing, and get the data back and try to analyze performance out of it. So we evolved lots of hardware. This is the last generation here. We use the radio now just to synchronize the nodes. Sometimes we pull an event off to look at it. We've got a removable SD card to store all the data in. We've got a full bi-range IMU, so low G, low rate, high G, high rate. These guys will go up to 140 Gs, 10,000 degrees per second. So we have the sensitivity still at normal motion. Like what you see in a dancer, but the extremes are much bigger. So we built several of these. We've been down several times, and the data looks beautiful now. This is a player instrumented up. We have no orthotic devices. We just strap them on. Our orthotics manufacturer made them for us. We just put them in, and they work very nicely now. I don't have time to show the video, but in spring training, we put them on players. We have data, and we're analyzing it. And we're pulling features out that look pretty interesting. The problem is the Red Sox want me to sign a confidentiality agreement. They want to give me more money, which is great, but they want me to not talk about it, especially to the Yankees or people that know the Yankees. So I don't know if MIT is going to buy that. And again, we've done a lot of work based on that with low power. We had a whole low power wing of my group, because you have these sensors. If you have them all on, your battery dies. Can you have a way of maybe turning them on only when you need it? So we have this technique that my student Ari Bembasat did his PhD on, we call groggy wake-up, just detecting when to turn the sensors on to make a measurement. Well, this is the Red Sox data out of sequence. So he'd build these big trees. He'd learn from the data. You take all the sensors, data with all the sensors on, label what's interesting. It would build these decision trees to optimally turn on the sensors to do a detection. So you're trading power versus how far down this graph you go, the accuracy of detection. So it gives you a way to trade off energy consumption with accuracy. And it runs in real time. Then, of course, you can have the power be passive. And that's what this little musical controller did. Some of you have seen this. We call it the musical trinket. So little passive RF tags on the fingers, and you have a virtual keyboard when you move them near the reader. And you can move other devices in. And it can look at the range. This is a pressure sensor. Some of them no angle. So you can basically sit there and perform just with really nothing, just a coil and a capacitor or RF tag. We're actually evolving this now to a computer interface for a wearable. So putting the tags with sensors on them on fingers, putting the reader up here, and when you have your heads-up display, you basically just gesture over here. So we're looking at it as another kind of controller. And of course, we have these. We built them for large dance events, very, very cheap wireless sensor. If you jerk it, it just gives a little pulse of radio. The batteries still work. It's very low power. So this is a dance event we had at MIT, Mark Feldmeyer's master's thesis. So we're putting a little drum hit on every arrival of a pulse from the sensors. So you can hear it's coarse, but you get rhythm, you get amount of activity. It's implicit in the structure of the audio. So now we took that data and mapped it into audio in a big max patch. So they're dancing with the sensors, and the rule he has is the more activity he sees in the sensors, the more music he makes. So it made more music, but that makes them dance more. That makes more activity in the sensors. That will make more music. That will make them dance more. So it's a positive feedback loop that kind of drives them off the edge. So you get the idea. And he keeps adding layers. And there are other segments where it kind of goes down. And this course you can use for lots of things. We generalized it into an active RFID for supply chain, lots of other sensors. So we can measure shock, we can wake up on sound, we can wake up on light, wake up on radio, and have adjustable thresholds, so the thing is adaptable. So you can take this relatively cheap platform, tape it onto a package that's shipping somewhere, and get a whole picture of the shipment for 0 battery life. This thing will last 5 years on a coin cell, basically. Again, it came out of music control. This is another one we're doing now, just finished last year. It's to take over the HVAC in our building. So this is a little sensor that Mark made kind of based on this technology developed for the little sensor. It measures temperature and humidity every minute with a local 802.15.4 radio. It updates the state, but it integrates continuous motion. With a little passive accelerometer and an analog integrator. Very, very low power. So this will last several years on a coin cell like a watch. And we wore them, it knows activity. It would control the HVAC in our building. We took over the dampers in many of our offices. We had other sensors. We could open and close the windows too. And then we built a model. So before we turned the active control on, we just basically tell it if we were too hot or too cold manually, and it would learn preferences based on the sensor input, whether we're comfortable or not. And it tends to break out in temperature humidity space. So we used it to control our HVAC, and yeah, much lower energy, much less chilled air once we turned the system on, and people were much more comfortable. So it worked out quite well. We're going to actually now expand that to essentially the whole lab now that we're in our new building. And we're looking a lot at what we call cross-reality, building sensors that we put all over the Media Lab, have video and audio, input, output with all these sensors, and also talk to wearables. So it's a complete sensing infrastructure. We built 50 of these around our lab. And we do lots of things with them, one of which is put the other end of this portal in a virtual world. So here's one example. We did many of them. This is Second Life. And this is the other end of a portal. So you can see activity, see who was in front of it. You can get audio and video feeds coming off of it. So the virtual world is uniting the real world in many parts of the real world. You can go to the virtual media lab and basically participate and poke in through these things with two-way connections. We're using now looking at a game engine. Second Life is a little bit limited, so we're looking at using a game engine for it. And we have lots of other applications. We have all this video we take with them. Can we label the video with socially relevant parameters so that I can go in and query the video with the story and see the story coming back just by the clips it shows of people that have these wearables on. So a little badge that analyzes the voice, looks at motion, IR to see who you're talking to, or wrist sensor does the same thing. Some of my students wearing them. Basically a feature extraction engine that gets social features out of the sensors. And then you can begin to ask the system questions, a story, give it a story. This is essentially the last thing I'll show. Is one more quick video, but I'll go through this very fast. So this is one of my students, Bo. Let me lean on it here. So it's following him, and it's looking at clips at first where he's not social and not moving that quickly. I've got to fast forward. So this is Bo. We're not doing this manually. It's coming automatic. All these cuts are coming out of the system. So we just went in with this template. Now transition to social. So a lot of activity in social. It's picking up the music too to best fit the mood that we scripted. So people didn't put this together. And every frame, of course, has Bo in it because we know from his badge that he's more or less in the field of view. So my students wore these for about 3 hours. And we had about 300 total hours of video shot from all the portals. It would take a human a ton of time to go through it. This just happens right away with the system. You query it, and that now transitions to Bo being alone but more active. So fairly simple at this stage, but still shows that with sensors to label the video, you can go with high-level queries, maybe even go with something like a story framework as you get more sophisticated features coming out. And then maybe it's the future of reality TV, where you just shoot with all of your embedded cameras, label it with sensors, everybody takes their own path through it. And of course, privacy is a big issue. We built little badges to turn them off. So if you don't want to be shown, you can program your badge to turn off any nearby video cameras or push the button. One of my students, the problem with that is if everybody does that, or if enough people do it, they just stop working, right? So why don't you just disappear yourself, rub yourself out of the picture? So one of my students, Gershon, now is working on identifying the person using the correlation between the wearable and the video, and just rubbing your image out. He's actually got a demo he just ran yesterday. And we want to do the same with audio. We've got the badge, we can look at local features, rub your audio out of what's streamed out, right at the node itself. And again, looking at dynamic media, we've got lots of these displays and what happens when people actually wander through a facility like this where it knows who you are, lots of rich media input, output, lots of sensing. How does the cloud manifest basically right next to you dynamically as you move through? No time to talk about this, but lots of smart surface work that we've done. I think I showed this when I was last here for NEAM. This is a little sphere with lots of sensors and also speakers in each one. So it's kind of a music controller. and it evolves collective behavior. So the tiles talk to each other, and it gets very agitated as you start to play with it. And very spatial. And it's evolved into flexible skin, and more recently evolved into what we call chainmail, rigid nodes and flexible interconnects. I'll save the best for last. This is essentially the end. My group has built a whole series of badges again in the last years that have kind of propagated throughout the Media Lab and really influenced a lot of our research on social interaction that we're doing, especially collaborations with Sandy Pentland's group. And this is a badge that had a big display, lots of sensing, and we had radio on it as well as infrared to see who you were facing. So we'd be able to label encounters. If you're facing somebody else, we could look at the sensor data. If you like the person, you could push a button to bookmark and exchange a virtual business card. If you like the demo, there'd be a tag on the demo you could bookmark. We asked, can you use the sensor data to predict that you're going to bookmark? Can you predict that you're interested before you even express interest? And it turns out that you can. This is work we did with Sandy incredibly well. So before you even bookmark, just from how your voice was changing, how your body language is moving, amount of time you spent there, we could predict very well, even with a simple classifier, same with the demo, that you were going to be interested. So with simple sensors like this, especially ones that have first-person viewpoints that kind of look with you, you can begin to back out lots of social parameters. But the real killer for this device actually was timekeeping for talks. You can see I'm going on a little bit long here. In Media Lab, we have these big events like we did yesterday. Everybody has 10 minutes. People take more than 10 minutes. So how do you get them to stop? Because with 20 talks like this, it's a train wreck. And somebody comes up and tries to stop the speaker, it gets kind of awkward. But we had big displays all over the audience. They had a radio on them. We could have them do whatever we wanted, so we had them flash the timekeeping cues to the speaker. And they didn't see it because they were facing forward. The speaker saw them all, and the difference was dramatic. So before we had these, we had all these overruns. Once we had the badges flashing the cues, people stopped pretty quickly. This is the last thing I'm going to show. This is Bill Mitchell. He's a great researcher doing fantastic work with redefining the car of the future in cities. But he was so excited that day that he didn't really stop on time.
So this is different from the traditional way of looking at sports
so
cars,
he's got
where you put a giant
little time left.
And get 400 horsepower. So the exterior to activate it, Festo muscle.
Not quite out of time. He's getting close.
And here's another version of the muscle car. We had a little fun styling this one up, and another version. And finally, before these things start to flicker at you, let me show you the city car that we're working on. So watch what happens when you get out of this guy. It folds up like a baby carriage into the back of the stack. And when
so we tried to get his attention, but he kept talking. So we could get literal. Yeah, we had a radio, we could have him do what we wanted.
Go from stack to stack. So here's somebody coming back to take her car off the front of the stack.
But Bill still kept talking.
So let me wrap up with the advantages that we can get from this sort of car as these things flash stop at me and as activated move. There we go. So the city car has these advantages. You get through with these stacks. You're able to suck up energy from solar, from wind power, intermittent energy sources. You're also able to
but he still didn't stop.
Into the grid from these stacks.
He had to get a bit more extreme.
You get no tailpipe emissions and you reduce engine noise. So you no fundamentally new technology in this, just new ways of putting technology together. We can build this tomorrow, and in fact we will. We're starting on it right now. So thank you. So on that note, I think it's time to end. Thank you very much.